I'm Carolyn Wu. I represent Catholic Relief Services. It's like Chris set up his first talk for the second part of it because it's almost sort of like a chapter 2 of this conversation with a little bit of overview. Before I go into the talk, just a little bit about Catholic Relief Services. We're actually created 70 years ago by the Bishops' Conference. So officially, we work in the name of the Catholics in this country. We're part of the church. Whatever work that we do it in the name of the Catholics from here and with your support. We were started in 1943 to bring refugees out of Eastern Europe. We've continued to evolve. Today, we're an organization that works in about 100 countries. We leave countries when they become affluent. We stay in those countries as long as we can if the government allows us until problems are solved. So in some of the places, we've been there for 50 years. Among the countries that we serve, some of those are in great political distress, a lot of conflict. It's not a surprise. That's where you usually find a lot of poverty. So this morning I got an email in the morning about bombing in Kabul, which happened 2 blocks from our office. And yes, we are in Kabul, Afghanistan. Yesterday I received an email from the Democratic Republic of Congo, neither democratic nor republic, but there was also a rebel invasion that has some exchange of firearms, and we had to evacuate our staff, although we know that now is calming down. It gives you a sense of the countries that we work in. We're in every country in Africa where Americans are allowed. We're in the Middle East. We're in Jerusalem. We're in the West Bank. We're in Gaza. Right now we're working heavily on the issues of Syrian refugees. We work in the poorest and most vulnerable of countries. We now serve about 100 million people in these countries to 130 million people. We have an organization of about 5,000 colleagues, which actually is not very large. If you think about a footprint of 100 countries, there's only 50 each. And that's because we work with 1,100 partner organizations around the world. These are partners, and half of those partners are Catholic partners. So we work with the Episcopal conferences, we work with the diocese, we work with the Caritas in those countries, we work with religious orders in those countries, so we have a very, very large local network. Everywhere we go, we receive permission from the bishops of the conference. We receive permission also from the local government. So it gives you that sense. In total, we have about 11 programming sectors that include emergency and shelter, food aid, food security, livelihood, education, sanitation, water, health, and peace building. So my comments today reflect sort of the work of Catholic Relief Services in the name of the U.S. Catholics doing work in the world. So let me just begin. In Ghana, we've talked a lot about Ghana and the tremendous progress that has been made, and particularly in how it manages its oil revenue. It's actually very excellent in terms of the accountability, taking the input from the public to be able to show where money really goes and does it go to where people want it to go. Botswana, you can see some of those things. Botswana, now actually the government holds equity in the companies that extract oils. Rather than signing away its right, it now actually holds ownership in these companies so that they could participate in the longer term on the gains, both by leasing out the rights as well as when participating in the profits when it's done. Liberia, democratic elections, and you see a number of the countries now where leadership change has been guided by constitutional procedures rather than just violence. So across the world, we actually see gains not only in terms of the quality of life, but as well as sort of the governance. We also see actually in terms of the number of conflicts, there's actually been a smaller number of cross-boundary conflicts. But what we still have is that we have internal conflicts and we have also sustained conflicts. But the number of new conflicts have actually gone down. But what we see is that clearly poverty is still prevalent. 21% of the population still lives below $1.25. What else do you see there? Violence. You know, poverty and violence just go hand in hand. And that's why we're in a lot of these troubled countries. 75% of people who are poor tend to be in some type of violent countries. We still see a lot of inequality, what we call horizontal and vertical. Vertical is the different income classes. Horizontal is really the different ethnic groups, the different pastoral groups and so on who are warring with each other. So it's not a surprise that if you think about the Millennium Development Goals, for the countries which are in violent conflicts, they have made very little progress on those. And so the issue really is we can't really talk about development, we can't really talk about progress if we don't address the whole issue of peace and the reduction of violence. So that gives you some sense of sort of the macro picture. A lot of times nowadays, actually, there's a lot of focus on economic growth. If nothing else, the African continent is one of the continents enjoying the highest growth, 5 to 6%. And for a change now, direct foreign investment actually outpaced aid. So there's a lot of talk about why don't we just invest in economic growth and forget aid, forget development. But that chart shows you that basically just getting economic growth is not enough for society. While growth benefits from good governance, it doesn't mean that when there is growth, automatically good governance follows. We know that that doesn't happen. I mean, we could take a look at China, lots of growth, but not necessarily good government. So there are a whole set of issues, basically, which are not addressed just because we have economic growth. And so markets could not serve all of the problems. Not everybody can get to the markets. Right? And some of those that you see would be over-dependence, not only on extractives, but also on remittances, and under-investment in agriculture. You just heard Chris talk, and I think yesterday we had a speaker also talk about agricultural poverty. There's an under-investment in agriculture, there's under-investment in social infrastructure such as school and health and so on, and public finance. There's environmental stress and degradation. We expect more natural crises to take place because of climate issues, and so that stress is going to create new problems. There's also donor mistakes that could create the wrong incentives, and of course, across the world, in Africa and the Middle East, there's a whole issue of the youth bulge and unemployment and violence associated with that. I just had a young woman visit me from Gaza. She's one of our staff. She's a Palestinian woman. She's probably no more than 30 years old. She's an engineer by training. She's part of our staff. Our staff is pretty young there. We have several people who are in their 30s. And we are doing a project where we will fund 1,000 internships. We are actually developing business opportunities or working with businesses in Gaza. You have to think about businesses in Gaza where they can't even have a proper supply chain of what they have come through the tunnels. All right, so we're trying to get businesses want to grow, and there's such a high unemployment rate. So this particular program we have is to place 1,000 interns into businesses without any cost to the business itself. For those 1,000 internships, we have 45,000 applications. So to talk about youth unemployment. And our staff there, they develop a scoring framework, and they score by computer. So if you apply, you get a sense of where you stand in terms of your score, just because otherwise we can't handle 45,000 applicants, and there'll be 44,000 people who are very unhappy with us if we don't take care of sort of how do we do it in the most transparent ways. But that just gives you a sense when we talk about the youth bulge and the unemployment. I think the idea of 45,000 people applying for 1,000 positions give you a sense. But those are the things which are happening, and you know, in life, nothing is all good, nothing is all bad. I think that's why we need intellectuals. So we have seen progress, but we have also seen some problems that need to be solved. A little bit about ourselves, and I think it's because, you know, next year is the 20th anniversary of Rwanda. just a reminder to ourselves that when we were working in Rwanda, we thought everything was just working out perfectly. We had a very large, successful program in Rwanda. Then all of a sudden, the genocide happened. We had staff who were at each other's throats, literally, with people who were killed. And it was a time of tremendous soul searching and said, what went wrong? How could this take place? Why did we not know about this? Wasn't we doing development in the proper way? And a lot of the soul searching led to the whole idea that it is very important to have the justice lens. You want to make sure that everyone has a place at the table. It also brings up the importance of peace building, which is now an integral part of our work. There's also the whole idea of integral human development. It is not enough just to solve one need. You have to address sort of the health of the person, of the family, of the community. So it led to also a refocusing on Catholic social teaching 20 years ago. And that is, how does Catholic social teaching inform the way that we have to design program and the way that we want to serve people? Which then lead to, people say, what is integral human development? And I think that gives you a little bit of idea. First of all, is that we take into account the complex environment. And as Chris said, environments are very, very complex. And now our people, one of our strategic initiatives is to make sure that all of our staff understand and be able to do context analysis. What would be the root of conflict? How close are the conflicts to the ground? How do we design programs so that we don't pit one community group against another community group, or this neighborhood that gets water and that neighborhood that doesn't get water? So to be very sensitive to understand the conflicts, the roots of those conflicts, and how do various type of interventions could either reduce conflict or increase conflict. Just to give you a little bit of example, diverting a little bit, we do a lot of work, as I say, in peace building. One of the grants that we recently received from the US government is to work in Central Africa to rebuild community, and this is in the area where the Lord's Resistance Army had devastated communities. The Lord's Resistance Army is sort of retrenching, and because Charles Taylor is being hunted. By the way, if you go to that area of the world, the sign of the people in that world is that their limbs are hacked off. If you go to Cambodia, you can see landmine victims without legs. If you go to Central Africa, that part, you will see people without arms. Those are some of the indicators and the imprints of the conflicts that we have faced. So this grant is to rebuild community using mobile devices. There are 5 billion mobile devices in the world, and it's actually a very important device of how you could deliver all sorts of programming in addition, including how you can do peace building. So we learned a lot about sort of the complexity of the environment. We also understand that the programming we do need to include multiple assets. It's not just food, but there's also physical well-being, such as health. There's financial assets that you have to help people build. There's spiritual assets, because many communities have a faith. It may not be our faith, but they have a faith. Social capital is another form of assets of the community. So we then, need to focus on multiple assets. And also multiple units of a community, starting from the individual to the family, and particularly because we're Catholic, families are very important to us. Families, communities, and then country. And also, it's not just to have these things, but also a place at the table, which means that it is important for them to access political structures, that they need to have a voice. If the government ministries promise some type of services, they need to be able to hold the government accountable for the delivery of those services. And finally, our goal is to do all of this so that people could achieve resilience. so that when shocks or crises happen again, they don't end up with nothing. And by the way, that is a very important development objective, resilience. And the reason is that we are expecting a lot more natural disasters. And there are not enough resources to keep on helping the people you used to help and the new people that you need to help. So the whole programming design now is how can we really lift people out of that very vulnerable layer of subsistence sort of living into a place where they could be steady, that they have some assets, they have some buffers, so that you could do risk reduction, for example. These type of index insurance is a form of risk reduction, so that when disasters happen, that group of people will be okay, so that you could take on new people. So that's what we do when we talk about integral human development. Haiti is a long story. It's an illustration of how this is in action, and because of time, I'm going to put this aside. You can come back to ask me questions about Haiti. But our Haiti response was not just to give people food or medicine after there was the earthquake, or just even to return them to shelter. But the holistic response requires to do shelter, education, medical facilities, as well as livelihood projects. And I'll give you some examples in the other parts of the world in a minute. So agri-livelihood, because so much of our talk yesterday and today is about agriculture, I want to give you some sense of the work that we do in taking farmers into a level of subsistence and beyond subsistence and into prosperity. So first of all, when we talk about these smallholder farmers, they're very small. They have less than 2 hectares of land, which is about 5 acres. So they're really teeny weeny. It happens to have 500 million farmers, which are these small farmers. In total, they represent 75% of the world's poor, and they represent 70% of world food production and 90% of African production. So when Chris said it's hard to see the productivity in Africa, just think about 90% of production is under these really small farms. They range from anywhere from 1 to 5 acres. The other thing which is important, which we haven't talked about, is that there is a projection of food shortage in the world, that by 2050, which is about 35 years from now, they believe that the demand for food will double, because there'll be more population and more affluent population. So it would grow by 100% in terms of demand, but the amount of land which is available for cultivation is only 11%. And what that means is that if you can get your current farmers to be a lot more productive, it addresses that gap. So it's not just a poverty issue, it's not just a moral issue. There is an issue also relating to sort of food supply. Women, of course, is actually also a big part of these small farms. They represent 50%. Our work in CRS is really how do we get these farmers, where they may have ad hoc and minimal market engagement, to formal market engagement, so that they could sell properly at a good price with a consistent sort of contract. When I say ad hoc market engagement, it means that they have extra produce and they leave it at the gate. And sometimes there are these traders who come around and may pick up their product, but they have no say over the price of that product. So the key is that how do we take these farmers from just basically sometimes growing food for their own need, which is subsistence, to a little bit of sort of ad hoc market engagement to formal market engagement, and to take them from subsistence to risk reduction, resilience, and then prosperity. There's actually a whole framework behind it. For us, it takes 2 to 5 years to get a farmer group from sort of subsistence level to the point where they are selling, yes, to Walmart. So we usually work with groups of farmers that range from about 350 in a group to 15,000 farmers in a group. So just think about the organization which is needed in order to group the farmers together. We diversify their crops. A lot of times they grow what their fathers and what their neighbors have grown, even though there are no demand, and even though the prices are low. They've never done anything else before. Since they've only grown maize and beans, they're going to keep on growing maize and beans, even though there's no market for maize and beans. So the whole idea is, how do you help them diversify their crops so that they grow things which has a market? Also things such as, how do you improve the planting, the production, soil management, water management, and in addition to that, the business training. How do you get them to think about what you spend, what is your cost, what is return on investment, and things also such as certification, so that you could demonstrate your quality and sell into the big retailers, and leadership training, because you need to know how to negotiate, you need to know how to run a quote-unquote co-op. And then at the end, value-added post-production, which is, if you grow too much, you got to have some ability to dry, to store. Sometimes you need roads. Sometimes you need to petition the government to have storage facility or roads facility. Can you do extra processing, such as canning and juicing and pulping, and then get it to the market? So I just want to say our scope of work, we have been doing this for about 7 years, and just like I said, some projects take 2, some projects take 5 years. We have done this work in 3 continents and 14 countries. We have worked with 80,000 farmers and 75 million in grants. Our crops have included mango, coffee, beans, roots, passion fruit, cacao, so on and so forth. The companies on the other end of our work have been Walmart, Green Mountain Coffee, Jollibee is a Filipino equivalent of McDonald's and Safeway and Starbucks, the Filipino equivalent. And I just want to contrast this work with what Chris just said about the Millennium Development Corporation. They spent $60 million to serve 70,000 farmers and got nothing. We work with 75 or 80,000 farmers on $75 million. But the difference is that they gave farmers 30 hours of training. We work with the farmers anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So if you talk about how do you take farmers into major transition, there's a huge journey that you stay with them. I'm going to show you a few videos, but before I do that, I'm going to tell a little story. One of my last trips was to Nicaragua. We visited with farmer Ernesto. Ernesto grew maize and beans all his life, but he could not sell his maize and beans for his input costs. You heard Chris talk about input costs for seeds and for fertilizers. The prices that he could fetch for his output was less than what he had to spend. He was deeper and deeper into debt. In some of these rural communities, the interest rate for borrowing money is 12% a month. Right? So think about Ernesto. His only asset that he has is causing him to get deeper and deeper into debt. He had to withdraw his children from high school, and he was terrified at the sound of a motorcycle, because the only people who have motorcycles are his bank collectors. And when he heard motorcycles, he knew they were coming to collect, and he had nothing left. His next step would be to sell his farm, which means that he would become a day laborer. He would have to go from farm to offer his labor for $1.25 a day. He would also lose his home. And this is his ancestral land, though small plot. That was his sort of whole inheritance. He was about to lose everything. In one of these projects that we did, basically, we rounded up farmers who were ready for change. And the first thing we did is that we changed them to passion fruit, because there's a global demand for passion fruit juice and passion fruit something. And he's never grown passion fruit, so he had free seeds, free input, and non-stop technical assistance. The extension agents, our partners, our local partners, and our staff basically stay with him at all stages of production. After his first year, he made enough to do 2 things: buy his seeds for the next year, and also be able to pay the interest on his loans. At the end of his second year, he retired his loans. And what he did then was, the next step he did was that he started a greenhouse. And this greenhouse took several $1,000s of capital. But what you do is that you actually start the seed in a greenhouse until it grows to about 3 inches. And then you take them out into the field. Why do you do that? Because the survival rate of that seedling is almost 100%. You don't just leave a seedling, from the beginning in the field, because it will take up the time in the field. So you actually open your field to more cycles of planting. You also have stronger plants to go out there. And the seedlings needed soil that had no bacteria and no weed. And to get that soil, there was a group of women. And as a business, they collected cow dung from the local area. They used the cow dung to feed the earthworm. The earthworm fertilized the soil. The soil became the medium for this type of seedling. I always call that God's humor. And that is from cow dung and earthworms. We were able to really lead to high productivity, a living for somebody else, a livelihood for somebody else. He now has 2 greenhouses. He also germinates seeds for the other farmers in this area. He trains farmers by groups of 25. He also got himself certified to understand the use of fertilizers and how do you test the soil. He decided that they were way overusing fertilizers and pesticides, that salesmen were just interested in selling them product when it was actually hurting their soil. He now has not only 1 motorcycle, he has 2 motorcycles, which is sort of like, I don't know if that's a good ending, but that's prosperity. His son graduated from university now, and he is an agricultural engineer. He has a daughter who's in university as an agronomist. So this is what a story looks like when we talk about how do you take people from, basically subsistence and about to go down into prosperity. I'm going to queue up 2 videos that both very short, less than 3 minutes, to show you some of the works that we have with different co-ops around the different countries. I think this is in Latin America. I can't remember these videos. But they show you kind of like 2 different phases in our work with co-ops on this. So I'm going to ask my colleague to queue up those 2 videos. So I just want to give you a sense of, I think markets can work. And we need markets, because otherwise we can't connect people to sort of productive systems. On the other hand, markets don't work by themselves, and they tend to leave a whole layer of people behind if you don't work with that layer of people. So I would say, in the Catholic social teaching, and the abundance of God, we need to take it to everybody so that they have a place to participate in this. My next thing that I want to share, and it's another set of video. She said we have to finish. But the next one I'm not going to show you. But what it is that it's about how do we accumulate capital for people. And a lot of the folks that we work with, they actually cannot even afford microfinance just because the risk is too big. We actually had microfinance banks. They're running well, and we've actually given it to our partners, and some of those we sold to start what we call micro savings. And I see Jim Perry, who just walked in. He was a big supporter of micro savings. And what micro savings do is that we organize people into groups of 20 or so and get them to start learning how to save. It could be 15 cents to $2 every time. Every time could be a week of a month. After 7 years now, we have involved 1 million people in saving circles, and they have saved $7 million, which they have lent out. And so these groups who used to be borrowers, now they are actually investors and they are lenders. So I'm sorry I don't have time to show that, but anyway, so you get a sense. Thank you very much.